So, where do we start? Well, let's discuss everything we know from the most recent doping revelations with the investigative journalist Declan Hill. Declan, thank you very much for talking to Beyond the Game. Now, you've been following this story very...
Not at all. Yakshamlar, thanks for having me on.
Anytime. Now, you've been following this story very closely. You were at the press conference today. Just
Yes.
how big is this scandal and how deep does it go?
Well, look, what was discussed today and what's coming out in these reports is really comparable with what that awful kind of dungeon of horrors that we saw coming out of East Germany back in the 1970s and 80s, where these, intellectual thugs that were the East German Sports Administration turned young girls, teenage girls, effectively into men by systematic doping. We're up there now. This is the kind of scale that we're talking about. And by the way, before we move on any further, the Russians do have a good point. There's lots of doping. There's lots of doping in other sports. There's lots of doping in other countries. But what we've seen coming out of the evidence from the McLaren report is truly state-sponsored doping, which at the moment we haven't seen in any other countries.
Well, Vitaly Mutko is once again considered in the middle of all of this, but he manages to avoid direct implication. We've had many guests saying that he's very much the puppet master of world football. Is it the case that it's the same regarding the Olympics?
Well, look, again, getting back to basics, this is a story that moves far beyond sport. This is really geopolitics writ large. Sitting and talking and standing next to the Russian journalists, there was no doubt about what side they were on. They were in attack dog mode and really felt that this was some kind of Cold War plot. However, having read the report's up on the internet, online, the evidence is pretty substantial that the Russian government, the sports ministers, were basically looking at Russian athletes tested positive for doping and gone da or niet. Who are we going to help cover up? Who are we not going to help cover up?
So do the Russians have a point saying that this is completely politically motivated, this attack on Russian sport?
Oh gosh, no. The Russians have a point in that there's doping. Now, lots of other people are doping. There's absolutely no question about that. And there's absolutely no question that there could be other state-sponsored people helping their athletes dope. There's no question about it. But in terms of the evidence that people have now, this is it. I mean, this is really something extraordinary.
Okay, well, what about the other countries that might be implicated in terms of doping? I mean, like you said before, Russia aren't the only ones that are implicated in doping.
Well, look, I mean, now we're moving from rock-hard DNA evidence, insider whistleblower testimony, into something else. I mean, what we saw today was hard legal evidence. There are a number of documentaries by the great German documentary maker Hayo Seppel, who was the guy that started all this. He was the guy that convinced the Stepanovas to come forward and whistleblow on this case. He went to Kenya before the start of the last Olympics and really had a good long look at the corruption in Kenyan running. There's all kinds of stuff like that. But look, getting back to basics, we've got legal proof now that there was a state-sponsored doping going on in Russia. We just don't have that kind of similar standard of legal proof anywhere else.
Okay, final question, and just a very quick answer. How badly does this reflect on the IOC, considering they didn't ban Russia from the Olympics, but the IPC did?
Yeah, look, I think this whole thing has been a complete and utter disaster. First of all, it's been a complete and utter disaster for the Russian athletes that have wanted to compete clean. Over the last 3 or 4 years, the McLaren report has shown that if you wanted to compete clean, you had a lot of problems, you had a lot of challenges to jump over inside Russia. And that's really victimization. Two, it's victimized all the athletes around the world that have been trying to compete cleanly. I mean, really, this has affected the London Summer Olympics we found today, the University Games, the Sochi Olympics, the IAAF World Championship in 2013. It was ongoing after the Sochi Olympics. So if you're a clean athlete, wherever you are, whether it's in Turkey, whether it's in Canada, wherever you are in the world, and you see these reports coming out and you see this evidence, you've got to be bouncing off the wall saying, what was I doing? I mean, this turned my sport into political theater.
All right, Declan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.